In an apparent move to tackle vote buying and control the amount of money in circulation, the Central Bank of Nigeria yesterday announced the redesign of the currency variation of 200, 500, and 1,000 naira. But beyond the reason adduced are the far-reaching implications of the effect of the dramatic move that took business community and the entire nation by surprise. Campaign financing, money laundering, terror financing, payment of huge sums of money to kidnappers are some reasons that are going to be adversely affected by the change. For once, those who have stashed huge cash ahead of 2023 elections for vote buying and prosecution of their campaigns will be forced to bring the cash out, and many of them will be forced to explain how they came about those monies to security operatives. From the 15th of December 2022, a new series of redesigned 200, 500, and 1,000 naira notes will be introduced to the Nigerian public. Making the announcement at the Central Bank head office in Abuja, the CBN governor announced the suspension of bank charges for monies deposited to encourage the deposit of existing currencies.
In recent years, the CBN has recorded significantly higher rates of counterfeiting, especially at the higher denominations of 500 and 1,000 naira notes, banknotes. Although global best practice is for central banks to redesign, produce, and circulate new local legal tender every 5 to 8 years, our existing series of banknotes, the Naira, has not been redesigned in the last 20 years. The bank remains resolutely determined to achieve the objective of its mandate as enshrined in Section 2B of the CBN Act of 2007 to ensure a strong and effective legal tender. It is therefore no longer tenable to continue with business as usual, especially given the continually evolving circumstances that could impeach the optimal performance of our Naira. Furthermore, we believe that the redesign of the currency will help deepen our drive to entrench cashless economy, as it will be complemented by increased minting of our e-Naira. This will further rein in the currency outside the banking system into the banking system, thereby making monetary policy more efficacious. Also, in view of the prevailing level of security situation in the country, the CBN is convinced that the incidence of terrorism and kidnapping will be minimized, as access to large volume of money outside the banking system used as source of funds for ransom payments will begin to dry up.
All right, let's talk about Dr. Bat.
Okay. This has caused a lot of excitement. And the question to ask is, what the CBN has done, is it in order? Yes, it is in order. To the extent that currency management is part of the functions of the CBN under Section 2, subsection 1 of the CBN Act of 2007. The second concern that people have raised is whether or not, the CBN has given enough notice. Well, yes, the CBN has given enough notice. Under Section 4, subsection 3 of the Decimal Currency Act, the CBN is required to, in an official gazette, give 3 months notice. And that is what the CBN has done, saying that the new Naira will be introduced in December, by December 15. And that by January 31st, the old notes will no longer be valid. Third, does the CBN have the appropriate approval? Well, Section 19 of the same CBN Act requires the CBN to get official approval, and that, we're told, has been granted officially before this announcement. So as to those who question the legality of it, they are wrong. The second point is that statutorily, the central bank is supposed to change the currency as it deems fit between a space of 5 to 8 years. And that is the standard global practice, what is done in other jurisdictions. The last time Nigeria made any attempt at all to change its currency was about 20 years ago. What was done in between was maybe launching a new note for commemorative purposes, or changing to, polymer notes for certain denominations. So this time around, what the CBN wants to do is to change the 200 naira, 500 naira, and 1,000 naira notes in circulation, and people have been served notice appropriately. Now, the question is, what is the purpose? I read in one newspaper today that this is first of all to rein in the money in circulation, bring it back into the coffers of the Central Bank of Nigeria, and then appropriately, exert the necessary controls. Because as Governor of the Central Bank, Godwin Emefiele, pointed out of about 3.2 trillion Naira that is in circulation as at the end of September, about 2.7 trillion out of that is not within the banking system in Nigeria. So what you have in this particular case is that people are hoarding money. All these people who keep money in underground tanks, in vaults, and who do not allow the money to be in circulation, those are the people being targeted. Those who use huge sums of money for purposes of money laundering. And we are also told that this will also check the payment of huge sums for ransom for kidnapping. So the CBN wants to bring all this into the system and then issue new notes. Now, it's therefore not surprising that the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, speaking through its chairman, has praised the move by the CBN of Nigeria as a welcome development. And the EFCC says that everybody should realize that under Section 2(1) and Section 4 of the Money Laundering Act of Nigeria, there is a certain threshold of monies that you can use for purposes of transaction, that you can't be carrying huge sums of cash all over the place. Otherwise, you will have contravened that section of the Money Laundering Act. And of course, the CBN chairman, the EFCC chairman, has put bureau de change operators and those who have money inside their vaults and overhead water tanks on notice. So that will create a dilemma for a lot of people, because if you go and deposit money in the bank, the CBN has said, if you have the old notes, go and deposit your money. Well, if you go there and you carry a Ghana must go of maybe 100 million naira, then of course, questions will be asked. I thought I saw in another story that the EFCC is going to go to banking halls to monitor people who are bringing money beyond the threshold. Well, the EFCC doesn't have to engage in that melodrama. That would be melodrama. Mm-hmm. The law, the CBN Act, requires the banks, the Money Laundering Act also requires the banks to report any unusual transaction. And since, there is information technology connecting all of these processes, you don't need to go and stand physically in the banking hall for that purpose. Another point to be noted is that this is an attempt to prevent vote buying in the 2023 general elections. With beavers, with biometric identification, most politicians have seen now that it won't be so easy to do vote buying. But if you have a lot of cash in certain parts of the country, you can influence the voter. And some politicians have already stashed away a lot of money that they think they can use on election day to influence the average Nigerian voter. So by the end of January, the Central Bank of Nigeria will have taken all of that money in. So where are you going to get the money from to come and buy votes? So that will put those politicians also in big dilemma. However, certain questions need to be raised. Number one, are the banks prepared for this? Because there's going to be a lot of pressure on the banks. You are going to have a lot of rush in the banking halls. So what measures are in place to make sure that those banks have the capacity to manage this? What the CBN governor has said is that the currency management processing centers of the various banks should now work from Monday to Saturday. And then for deposits, there will be no bank charges, just to encourage people. But do the banks have the capacity? Number two is that as people take money into the banks until the deadline, Now, many of them, many of the customers will have to rely on digital payments. People who use ATMs, people who can use POS and all of that. Now, what quality of infrastructure do these banks have? Do they have the capacity in that regard? Because if there is a sudden increase in digital payment, digital processing, some of these banks are still struggling with their technology. Would they be able to put the appropriate technology in place? The other issue has to do with small-scale businesses who we have been told may well be affected. But the CBN is talking about some tokens for small-scale businesses and, you know, people in the rural areas. Well, they have to take a look at that to make sure that, you know, people are not unnecessarily put under pressure. So all of this taken together will be about the rationale, the validity, the reasonability of the move. Second, the huge costs and impact that it is likely to have. And then the third point will be the point that has been raised by some people, that between now and the end of January is probably too short a period. After all, when in the UK, they decided to change the £20 note and the £50 note into a polymer, people were given up to about a whole year. They were given up to about a whole year, you know, to take their money back and change it and you know, reduce the income there. So these are some of the issues, you know, involved in terms of the outline of it.
I mean, great point made. We get the idea of what the CBN is trying to do: mop up a lot of cash, shut, you know, the monetary supply that normally, or the money in the hands of terrorists, bandits, kidnappers, and the likes, prevent vote buying and all of that. I mean, good idea on paper, but I like to dig deep when we have arguments and look at different forms of logic. Number one, I posit a logic where it might bring about another speculator's paradise, because most Nigerians always hedge their currency against the dollar. And there's a dollar and black market that Nigerians can just take their money and go buy dollar to buffer and hold it in their hands. And when you also talk about the fact that politicians, election period and all of that, most of these politicians stash their money in USD. We also how dollar rates to the Naira increased because delegates were giving USD during the election primaries. So, as far as I'm concerned, we also should look at the repercussion effect. And the cost of printing, you talked about the money in circulation, about 3 trillion. So if we are to reprint, how much are they going to reprint? And what's the cost of reprinting that money? Wouldn't that add to inflation? The CBN is already printing so much with ways and means already. That's setting us back 20 trillion. They've had to securitize that loan for about 40 years for us. Probably my children will have to pay part of that loan in higher inflation rates. So when you look at that factor, and really, is this really going to prevent vote buying? Any politician worth his salt can still get cash. In this era where politicians carry bullion vans around, whatever the new denomination they bring, a certain politician will just tell a bullion van to drive to him, and they take the bullion van and they take the money, whatever it wants to share to people. So when you look at these things critically, there are many parts of the arguments we should look at. You know, because yes, we get the idea, cut these people off, cut that off, cut this off, cut that off, yeah, kidnapping, banditry and all of that, take cash off the pockets. But arguments like, how are you even going to permeate it through the banking system? Dr. Abati, you were talking about, do we even have enough banks, commercial banks in this country? For instance, in my village, Udogbolu, there is no commercial bank. I remember for the longest time since the cooperative bank that later became Sky Bank back in the days was robbed over 10 years ago, and they moved their branch out. There's been no commercial bank. In Ikene too, I'm not sure. I think where you can even get semblance of multiple commercial banks along that axis should be Shagamu. So people have to travel miles. So if my father were still alive, bless his soul, he will have to go all the way from Odogbolu to Shagamu because he wants to convert the money. I mean, so these are the many factors we should also look at. But I get the slant of the CBN. I get the idea. I get the thinking behind it. Yes. But the implementation, and at a time like this, what are the other factors that will come out of it? Hope it will not lead to another jump in speculators' market with the dollar to the Naira. What is the case where people now start to make a run on the Naira, using it to convert to the dollar and things like that? I mean, there's so many things part of it. But like I said, we keep making arguments and keep reviewing these things as it goes on.
So if you have, say, 100 million, you go and buy dollar at 780 Naira to the dollar.
But it's a benchmark.
At the end of the day, your 100 million Naira, you throw money away just because you want to share dollar at polling booths.
But Dr. Bati, it's a benchmark because what is not to tell you that same Naira to the dollar can increase? Dr. Bati, what was the rate of the Naira to the dollar before the primary election? Wasn't it about 600? So it's always a hedge either ways. Moving on to the next story, the Federal High Court sitting in Naira has ordered the federal government to return separatist leader Nnamdi Kanu to Kenya, where he was abducted. The judge, who relied on October 13 appeal court judgment, also awarded 500 million naira as general damages against the federal government. The judge described the capture of Kanu from Kenya on June 19, 2021 as an abuse of his fundamental human rights. Shortly after the judgment, Kanu's counsel, Law Ejimako, urged the federal government to immediately obey the ruling and return Kanu to Kenya.
We asked the court to restore Nnamdi Kanu to the status quo antebellum, to his status as of June 19, 2021. And that prayer was granted. What it means is that the government is now required to take steps to restore Nnamdi Kanu to Kenya, or if they wish, to his country of second nationality, which is the United Kingdom. And then the next most important relief, as far as we are concerned, is halting his prosecution. So we are happy with the outcome, and we believe that this judgment today has strengthened the previous judgment of the Court of Appeal on 13th October. And of course, the judgment of Abia State High Court of January, which continues to be of overriding importance, because that very judgment implicitly held that Nnamdi Kanu never jumped bail, which is the mantra the federal government has been known to be, flying around with in trying to justify what he did in Kenya.
All right, Dr. Batson.
Okay, the ruling of Justice Ayadike, Federal High Court in Umuahia yesterday, is clearly on all fours with the position of the Court of Appeal in Abuja last week. The Court of Appeal last week had said that the federal government of Nigeria did not follow due process in engaging in the extraordinary rendition of Nnamdi Kanu from Kenya. And therefore, to the extent that nothing can stand on nothing, which is a basic notorious principle in law, their lordships dismissed all the charges against Nnamdi Kanu. Now, but the federal government responded at a time to say that the issues that were determined by the Court of Appeal did not relate to certain other issues that were still pending. And both the Office of the Attorney General and Minister of Justice and the National Security Council that met subsequently said that the federal government will go on appeal. This other case at the Federal High Court in Umuahia is a fundamental human rights enforcement case. Kanu and his lawyers saying that, look, he has fundamental human rights under the law. And again, the Federal High Court in Umuahia ruled on all the counts in his favor and also awarded damages in his favor of 500 million against the federal government of Nigeria. Now, the question now is, this is a major victory for Nnamdi Kanu, both at the federal level and also at the Federal High Court level. Of course, it will have been strange for a Federal High Court to overrule an appellate court. That would be against, the order of the hierarchy of courts. So that's why I said what has been decided is, of course, to be expected because it's in pari materia with the position that have been taken by a superior court in a related matter. But the second question, will the federal government of Nigeria obey the courts? Will the Nigerian government go on appeal? These are the issues. But in terms of the optics, it's not looking really good for the federal government because 2 courts now have ruled in favor of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu.
Right. I mean, very well said, Dr. Babati. Because we don't have any more time, I think the federal government should do the needful. Yeah, court orders here and there. Just obey them. Just obey them.